Hello and welcome to Straight Talk, brought to you by Straight Furrow. I'm Karen McCarthy. Coming up in the program, kids are back at school this week after their holidays, so what better time to discuss health and education? There's much talk of the need for more resources for children struggling at school, but what about those at the other end of the spectrum? We explore the need to nurture gifted children, what more we could and should be doing, and why country kids in particular might be missing out. And a man, an audiologist, who's doing much to make life easier in the classroom for kids not reaching their potential. Not because they're not bright, but he says because they simply can't hear properly. My guests this week, audiologist Dr. Bill Keith, a hearing specialist and the founder of the Auckland Clinic Sound Skills, and from the Gifted Education Centre, Mary St George, a teacher, a specialist in online education and an interest in rural kids with special abilities. Thanks to both of you for being here. Bill, can we start off with you? Your field of specialty in recent years has been APD, auditory processing disorder. What is that?
Auditory processing disorder is a hearing disorder. It's a hearing problem, but it is often not recognised. It's often not diagnosed at all, or it's misdiagnosed. But it's simply a hearing problem where the problem is not in the ears, but it's in the brain. A simple definition is when the brain can't hear.
Is it wrong to call it a hearing problem then, or is it something to do with the wiring between the ear and the brain?
I think it's very important to characterise it as a hearing problem. Otherwise, people will think of it as a learning disorder or some other problem with the brain and won't treat it properly. But it's a hearing problem, and we need to treat the hearing disorder. And so I very much classify it as just another type of deafness.
Why have we not heard much about it?
I think that that's partly because it's a complex area, and because no one profession can provide all the services that you need to deal with it. You need education specialists, you need speech language therapists, you need audiologists. So you have to bring together a multidisciplinary team, and there's quite a lot of complex knowledge to learn, and a lot of audiology clinics simply don't do it, or do it in a rather cursory manner. So services are quite patchy. But that's all changing. We're hearing a lot more about it now because there's been a lot of good research in recent years about how to diagnose it, and as you would know, there are a lot of treatments now which are very effective.
Let's bring Mary in on this. You work with children, you've worked with children for years in the classrooms. What do you know of APD?
We've had a kid through our online program for gifted children who was assessed at our head office, and our psychologist actually picked up that he may have a central auditory processing disorder, and he was assessed and he got some kind of device, which teaching him online I haven't seen, that enabled him to listen to the teacher more effectively in the classroom. Yes. Now, his mother contacted me several times to express her profound gratitude that someone had figured out what made her little boy tick, that he had some strengths and that there was this problem. She always knew there was something, but she didn't know what it was. And it made such a difference to his ability to do what was asked of him at home and at school to gain an understanding of this disorder.
I think that's typical of a lot of stories. You have the parents who've been going to lots of agencies and specialists to try and work out what's wrong, and often not getting an answer, or hopefully finally finding out, yes, it's a hearing disorder and we can treat it. You have the special hearing aids that we use having a very beneficial effect sometimes, or just immediately the child suddenly can hear better.
What is this device? Mary mentioned there was the child received some sort of device. Is it like a regular hearing aid, or what is it?
It's not quite a regular hearing aid. And this is not the only treatment for APD, but one of the treatments which can be extremely effective in many cases is a special type of hearing aid. So they're tiny little hearing aids, but they are linked to a radio transmitter so that the parent or the teacher or whoever is speaking wears the transmitter, and the child then hears the speaker's voice directly into their ears without any competing sound and at a louder level than they would otherwise hear.
So it's sort of turning the sound foreground up and the sound background down?
Yes, exactly. And there are two elements that are helping. The amplification is really important in when you have a brain that can't hear properly, it will hear better if you make things louder. That's quite simple. But also it does concentrate on the foreground, on the main signal, and so you're not so distracted by any other background sound, because children with APD or adults with APD can be have difficulty hearing with even a little bit of background noise. An adult I know with APD says that when a fridge turns on, she finds it very difficult to hear a conversation. When that fridge noise is going, most of us would not even notice a refrigerator turning on.
So it's the background clutter, like the white noise kind of thing, that gets in the way of kids hearing, or as you say, adults even, who's talking to them. And kids, that's the teacher at the front of the classroom.
Yes, it's more of a problem for children or adults with APD than it is for people with normal hearing.
It's very popular in our classrooms at the moment to have a number of groups working on different things. So your maths groups, they're often interactive and there's a lot of conversation going on. Whereas back when I was at school, and perhaps when you were at school, the teacher was up the front and we were all listening and it was quieter. Do you sort of have recommendations for teachers today on how they can handle things in the classroom to give less background distracting noise? Or is it mainly about the device?
Certainly we need to give advice to teachers, and so in our sound skills team we have a specialist team which includes an education advisor who will go into the school and work with the child and the parents and the teacher and help them optimise the classroom situation, because a lot of other activity is a problem for children who've got attention deficit disorder or auditory processing disorder or some other problems. But they just have to be treated like children with other types of deafness. Get their attention before you speak to them. Don't give them too much lengthy information. Keep it in smaller chunks. Face them when you're talking. Make sure they're getting a good, clear signal.
Does this affect boys more than girls? Is there a gender difference? Or
yes.
There is?
Yes, twice as many boys as girls, and that occurs with some other areas, doesn't it?
That would fit my casual observations as well.
Yes.
It's more often boys.
Why would that be?
I don't know the reason for that. It is seen with some other disability areas like ADHD, I think, and autism. I'm not experts in those areas, but with APD as well.
You mentioned those other conditions, and I imagine if a kid can't hear properly, you're going to have situations where they might be written off as having dyslexia or inattention or playing up and not, being naughty in class, being a slow learner. You make the point maybe they just can't hear.
Yes, and that's so often the case. And those are the two labels they might get, dyslexia or just being a slow learner, and they simply just can't hear. And you put the right hearing aids on them and it can transform their hearing immediately. As soon as you try that in the clinic, they can have a normal conversation with their parents. First day at school, they might come back saying, I heard the teacher today, and not being so exhausted at the end of the day from the strain of trying to hear.
So it's quite a transformation.
And
sometimes.
That fatigue for kids that are struggling with some of these issues is huge.
Yes.
And as we all know, when you're overtired, you make more mistakes, you're more irritable, you're more likely to lose your rag with people, and they can be seen as being naughty as well, when in fact they may be trying harder to be good than the next child.
Yes, if a child has a problem like APD, then secondary effects, some will be on the learning, spelling, vocabulary, language, reading and so on, and other learning. And then there are the other effects, withdrawal, frustration at struggling to learn but still having problems, not getting positive reinforcement for all their efforts, sometimes anxiety, withdrawal, and poor social integration, and then behaviour problems. We treated a little girl recently and the teacher said afterwards, I really thought she was just a naughty girl. And she wasn't. She couldn't hear.
It's as simple as that. Coming up after the break, more on APD, including what to look out for if you're worried about your child, the causes and the symptoms. Stay with us. Hello, I'm Karen McCarthy. You're back with Straight Talk, sponsored by Straight Furrow, and our guests, Mary St George and Dr Bill Keefe. Bill, how do you distinguish APD from other hearing difficulties? I guess that is a challenge.
That really is. Children with APD pass ordinary hearing tests. Ordinary hearing tests use beeping tones and single words, which are easy for a child with APD to hear. They struggle with more complex information. It's like slow internet modem versus broadband. You can get simple information across, but if you try to download a video clip, you have to have the processing speed has to be fast.
So what are the signs? I mean, what are the symptoms? What do you look for?
The key symptom of APD is difficulty comprehending spoken speech unless it is brief or clear or simple. So when there is more complex information, children don't hear it well. One mother said to me, if I say to my 3 children, go upstairs to your rooms, get your school bags and go to the kitchen and put your lunches in your school bags, 2 of them go and do that, and the 3rd one with APD will go upstairs and eventually wander down with a jersey. There was too much information. So that's the key symptom.
Mary, from what you're hearing from Dr. Keith, how many bright kids do you think, kids who are gifted, who end up under your tutelage in the gifted education centres in the centre, how many of those kids do you think possibly have struggled in mainstream schools because they might have this?
We do see kids through that have this and other processing disorders. Some of them on one of the assessments they use before giving children access to some of our programs, some are assessed by the schools and some are assessed by us. They look at processing speed, and I think it is an auditory test for that subtest. I don't do the testing. And we find various ways in which kids are being missed. So we've got the parent that will make the application sometimes, and we see the teacher form, and it's clear that the teacher doesn't think this child is gifted. But when you look at what's been assessed, you can see both why the gifts are there and why they don't show up in the classroom. And it's things like the classroom environment with background clutter and distractions interfering with the child showing what they have to offer. But home is different, it's quieter, children feel safe, things are more predictable to them, and they know how and when to engage with people and to show what they know.
To define for us, will you, gifted? Everybody likes to think their son or daughter is special. What is a gifted child?
Okay, for me, it's a child whose abilities are so great that it's difficult for a regular classroom teacher to cater for them as well as everybody else. So they may have already learnt what the class is about to learn at the beginning of the unit, and there may be nothing there for them unless there's some tweaking done to the curriculum. However, there are a number of definitions around, obviously. In New Zealand, we tend to think of the top 5 to 10% of the school population being gifted. It's not just that 1 in 1,000 that you might call a genius or whatever. It's all those who are quite difficult to meet the needs of with everything else going on in a busy classroom. And some of them will only be gifted in one area and will be struggling in others, perhaps because of a processing disorder, perhaps because of dyslexia or something else.
And it's interesting, isn't it? A lot of those kids, I imagine, they could end up being written off as being naughty, being restless, not listening, being a slow learner, when actually they're quite the opposite.
Absolutely. I mean, imagine yourself being put in a primary school class and asked to colour in your alphabet sheets when you can already read a chapter book. I know 2 children that went to school already reading chapter books, but they are meant to sit and do that with the rest of the class. Now, depending on their personality, they think everyone else I'm doing this with is lovely, we're having fun together, and they knuckle down, or they think this is boring. How can I make some fun? What can I fidget with? Who can I annoy? And if they go either of those ways, gifted is not the first thought.
So how crucial is the role of a teacher in all of this for both of you, for the children you deal with? The teacher has a class of 30 kids. I mean, how difficult must that be to spot one?
It is difficult because of the complexities of classroom life today, but we know the teacher is the most effective piece of teaching equipment in every classroom. We don't think of ourselves as equipment, but when we compare it with everything else you can get, the computers and the interactive whiteboards and the books, the way the teacher interacts with the class is still the most important thing. So teachers do have to be on the lookout. Now, they can't always provide, which is where we come in. We have an online program for gifted children, particularly for rural children, because the same organisation runs one-day schools in the cities, and they can log on and find content there that is differentiated for gifted children, and they can access that in class time. So when it's one of those lessons that they already know everything about, that can be their time to log on, choose some activities, do some independent work, or with a small group that might be operating in a school, and engage with some genuinely challenging material, and also network online with others like themselves, because we have some amazing teachers doing wonderful things for gifted children, even if they know of their gifts in small rural schools. They get to know them better than city teachers sometimes, because they may have them for several years. But what they can't do is they can't organise rural parents to have their gifted children in batches so that there's someone else to engage with for these children right there where they are. Or there might be only 2 or 3 others, but online there's 50 or 60 others, and that's quite a different thing. And they can be looking at each other's work, leaving comments. There's little places under where each child displays their work for the others to leave comments. And they come into the chat room using Skype and talk to each other with voice. We've got 2 schools that don't have fast enough internet access for Skype, but most of them use Skype. And it's wonderful. They bounce off each other's sense of humour. They push each other a little further with their own questions.
And that would take the load off the teacher as well, who's got to look after all the other kids in class.
Absolutely, because if you spend some time asking gifted children genuinely engaging and probing questions, as every teacher would love to do, then you've got to worry about the child that doesn't even understand the probing question in the other corner, who's happily cutting up the upholstery of the teacher's chair, as one child I know of did. It wasn't my chair, it was another teacher. But when the other children can't engage with the curriculum you offer to this bright group, you have problems about what to do with them. And they're not necessarily going to be doing the work that you've carefully set for them. So it is a challenge.
I think it's very difficult for teachers with big classes to recognise and help all these children with different problems or abilities. But at least if they're identified, that's a start. And with auditory processing disorder, services are patchy throughout the country anyway, and in regional areas there are often not enough good paediatric audiology services in the public hospitals. So I think it's even more incumbent on teachers and parents in these areas to be aware and to try and spot these children, because they haven't got the big clinics to send them to unless they come all the way to Auckland.
Someone's got to be looking out for them. More in store after the break, including the role of rural broadband, why high-speed internet and access to computers in all schools, especially in remote parts of the country, is so crucial for our kids. See you shortly. Welcome back to Straight Talk, brought to you by Straight Furrow, and our guests, Dr. Bill Keith and Mary St George. Mary, how helpful is new technology in all of this? You mentioned Skype just before the break, in terms of nurturing these kids.
It's made a huge difference, things like Skype. When I started with Gifted Online, we had just text-based chat rooms, so the children were typing to each other. And when a child has just mastered a skill, perhaps when any of us have just mastered a skill, they know one right way, and they're going to do it that one right way. So they're going to read down the page. It doesn't matter if they've missed something. They're not going to look back up for what it was that would make sense of this conversation. They're going to go down. So now that we can talk to each other with our voices online, and children using skills they already have to communicate with each other, it is overwhelmingly easier. And the children are going into more depth, taking more risks with the ideas they put forward. If you've got to type something and you're only 7, you're not going to bother if it's long and complicated. So that's been tremendously helpful. But on the other hand, rural broadband is not always on our side. The quality of it is very patchy. And we have some kids and they're popping in and out of Skype or the chat room if they're broadband isn't fast enough for Skype. Like there's a revolving door on there and little Johnny is here and then he's gone and then he's back on and we have to remember what he's missed and feed that back in. So I think there are huge issues for rural communities in getting good access to fast broadband.
It's really important. Is there just a downside to having a gifted kid?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, a lot of the work I do actually is with parents saying, yes, he or she will be okay. And yes, it is quite usual for gifted children to be highly sensitive, to worry, because they can understand adult problems, but they haven't got adult experience in being water off a duck's back, letting go of those problems. So they understand global climate change. They understand the extinction of species. They worry about these things. They tend to have stronger emotions because being gifted is also tiring, like your auditory processing thing, that they're thinking all the time and they don't really know how to stop thinking. Some of them don't get to sleep easily at night. So they have all those intensities that come from being tired as well. And they are pushing their parents. There's this perception out there that the parents of gifted children have made them gifted by pushing them, whereas there are a lot of parents out there running to keep up with where can I find more information about the current interest of the child? Where can I find books that are challenging enough to be interesting but aren't about sex and all those things that are in so much of the teen literature? And the parents are working very hard at filling this information-hungry hole, meeting the needs, holding the social and emotional things together, and often thinking, goodness, I was like this when I was growing up, and I didn't realise, where does that leave me? So I do a lot of talking on the phone to parents about the flip side.
It's interesting because it boils down to the parents, and the same with a child with APD or hearing difficulties. Nobody knows their kid best than their mum or dad. They need to be tuned in, don't they?
Yes.
And know what to look for.
Yes, I have a lot of admiration for the parents we see who have taken their children on quite a journey to find out what their special needs are and to get someone to believe them and to come up with an answer and to treat them. So parents do need to be, as I've said, parents need to be aware of these symptoms and to persist until they get answers, so that we do detect children with APD. It is the most neglected area of hearing services in New Zealand, and we need people to be looking out and finding these children because they can be so easily helped. Because the hearing problem is in the brain, neuroplasticity comes to our aid. The brain can strengthen existing pathways, set down new pathways, learn new skills, and that's what helps children with APD improve their auditory performance and their auditory skills. So it's very treatable if we can find them.
It's got to be found, as you say, it's identifying it, and we're not going to find it if we're not looking for it.
That's right.
Is this something hearing services, maybe, at a national, a government level, we need to be putting more resources or attention into APD?
Some of us very much believe that, and currently the National Foundation for the Deaf is really shining a spotlight on the problems in this area and the great inequity that children with other types of deafness get free hearing aids and educational help. Children with APD or central deafness usually get no funding whatsoever. Even adults who need hearing aids get funding for those hearing aids. So why should this group of children with a hearing problem not get similar assistance?
And by the same token, children who are difficult and maybe struggling in school because they're not up to par, there's help there for them. The gifted kid is often forgotten about.
Often, although we have some wonderful schools who are finding ways to be there for their kids, and we're very flexible at Gifted Online. We work in with a teacher who will support the kids, we work in with a teacher aide or a parent help. We're about doing whatever it takes. I was interested when you mentioned neural plasticity. Sorry, I'm changing the subject. Does the device pave the way for the brain to change in that positive way?
That's a really interesting question, and one of the most interesting things I've learned since I started specialising in the APD area. Unlike hearing aids for other types of deafness, or unlike in other types of deafness when you use hearing aids, when you use hearing aids with APD, the auditory skills improve. Now, I've worn glasses since I was 12, and if I take them off, I'm short-sighted again. But APD is different. if you give that good, strong information and through amplification, the auditory pathways improve and hearing
Brilliant.
actually improves. So the hearing aids are therapeutic as well as assistive.
Wonderful.
There is help there. I'm going to leave you two to talk. I think you've got much to carry on with.
Indeed.
You've been watching Straight Talk, brought to you by Straight Furrow. Thanks to my guests, Mary St George and Dr Bill Keefe, for being with us in the studio. And as always, to you at home for watching. Now, if you'd like more information about APD, head to the website at soundskills.co.nz. And if you want to find out more about resources for gifted children, head to giftededucation.org.nz. And if you'd like to get in touch with us, check out the Country 99 TV website. We'd love to hear from you. I'm Karen McCarthy. See you next time for more Straight Talk.